You're looking good, and it feels good to be with you today. Hello, I'm Kendall Bryan Hunter, author of this book, Consider My Servant Job. Whatever the next holiday that's coming up, I think it's 4th of July. It makes a great 4th of July gift. Well, I'm author of that book, and this is Come Follow Me, Get to the Point, where I always show up. I always come prepared. We never take roll, and it's bring your own refreshments. This is one of my secret indulgences is onion rings. Just to be transparent, I do own stock and great value Walmart, so but I'm not compensated other than stock. The onion rings are delicious, except the 16% sodium and 10% carbohydrates, 4% added sugars, but it's better than some of the garbage we feed in church refreshments. So, in the news, Elder Bednar said this, we do many things in the church, but if what we are doing is not helping people prepare to make and keep sacred covenants, I don't know why we are doing it. Put that at the top of your agenda. Does this leading people to make or keep sacred covenants? This is the time of boys camp, girls camp, and trek. And as you're planning that, how does that lead people to make and keep sacred covenants? How does that lead people to Christ, these activities? Still continuing on with our economic pioneers discussion that I talked about, we don't like what's going on in the media. So one strategy is to set up a rival studios, and Angel Studios is a good example of that. BYU TV is another example of that. Granite Flats, Studio C. However, another approach is for a bunch of members to buy stock in these companies. Warner Brothers stock's at $7.18. That's more than that's about a Big Mac price right there. Mattel's at $17.82. What do you think about Barbie? Get a bunch of members to buy stock in these companies, and we can force a change. Universal Studios, Sony, we can change the type of movies they make and the content if we get a sizable block of members of the church. Economic pioneers, economic Minutemen. Today I went to the Church History Museum to see their display, and they have the display about some of the artifacts we got from the Community of Christ. One of them is the two paintings of Joseph and Emma Smith. They have the original door to Carthage jail, and they have a picture to show it, so it looks like it's there. But the big thing is we now, in addition to the Kirtland Temple and a bunch of buildings in Kirtland and other areas of the church, we now own the Joseph Smith Translation manuscripts. So this is a Community of Christ Bible. We now own the manuscripts. This Bible is now our Bible. And I hope we're taking it seriously. It's Joseph Smith said two things. One, the Joseph Smith Translation was a branch of his calling. He taught from it. Orson Pratt taught from it. It was used in the lectures on faith, and John Taylor used it as book Mediation and Atonement. And after that, there was a gap until President Joseph Fielding Smith. He is probably the first president of the church that picked up using the Joseph Smith Translation and was a big advocate, and that's part of the reason why we have it in our version of the Bible that was published back in 1979. So embrace it. We're at the beginning of a third renaissance of the Joseph Smith Translation. The first renaissance was when the process was going on and the saints were reading the Book of Moses printed in the church periodicals. The second one was in 1979 when we had our version of the Bible with the helps, and we had the Joseph Smith Translation notes in the footnotes and in the back. That was a monumental change because there were a lot of misunderstandings and misconceptions, and that broke that. But here, now that we own it, this is a third renaissance of the Joseph Smith Translation, so embrace it. You can go to buy a copy of it. You can go to archive.org and download a PDF of it, and I have a link to that PDF of the Community of Christ Bible. It's called the Holy Scriptures, and if you search for it, make sure you include the Joseph Smith's name in it, so you're not getting another translation. But come up with a mechanism to read it and enjoy it. Read it cover to cover so you're not trying to zigzag around on your footnotes. It's a branch of his calling, and Joseph Smith prophesied that the church would yet fall if we did not embrace this. So that's... And another thing, too, is if you go up to the Church History Museum, they have a nice display of Minerva Teigert's paintings. Now, this is a picture of Peter, James, and John giving Oliver Cowdery and Joseph Smith the Melchizedek priesthood. This painting, the original was a very large one, and it was in the Provo Tabernacle, and this was destroyed in the fire. And in the museum, they have a small strip from the bottom that survived the fire. This painting is now gone, is lost forever, and because of this, the church started getting really protective about the Minerva Tigert paintings, so they're having them in one location now, and they're preserving them and taking really good care of them, because this is gone forever unless she paints it again in the afterlife, or somehow resurrects. So here we are, today's study. The theme is Satan's Deathpit. And just pay attention. We're going to cover a lot of topics here. Satan's Deathpit. However, we begin in Alma 13, and one of the problems with this lesson is Alma 13 is part of this longer discourse from last week's lesson. But due to whatever reason, they cut it off and put it on here, and so we're getting this a little bit out of context. As it says in 1331, and Alma spake many more words which are not written in this book. So what we're reading is a longer sermon, and these are the highlights of it, and this one was attached to it, but just got cut off. Now, this chapter talks about premortality. Orson Pratt said this. The same doctrine, premortal existence, is included in some small degree in the Book of Mormon. However, I do not think I should have ever discerned it in that book had it not been for the new translation of the Scriptures. Did you catch that? Orson Pratt said that the premortality is in the Book of Mormon, and it's in this chapter, but unless it wasn't for the new translation of the Scriptures, we just cannot escape that Joseph Smith translation. Cherish this Bible. Because of that, he is able to understand that doctrine. Source, Journal of Discourses, Volume 15, page 249. Now, this talks about the premortal existence, and it's talking about how men become high priest. And it has a statement that everyone starts out on the same standing, and the process goes they choose to obey or disobey. Parley P. Pratt said, this is Journal of Discourses, Volume 1, page 258, it may be inquired why God made one unequal to another or inferior in intellect to the capacity, to which I reply, he did not create their intelligence at all. It never was created, being an inherent attribute of the eternal element called spirit, which element comprises each individual spirit, which element exists in an infinitude of degrees in the scales of intellect and all varieties manifested in the eternal God, and thence to the lowest agent, which acts by its own will. So that is a very formal, very poetic way of saying is that some stuff's inherent in people, but it's also how you use your agency. And people get ordained high priest because of their exceeding great faith. On the other hand, some people choose otherwise in premortal existence. Now, this, first of all, what does the term high priest mean? In one sense, how we use it today, someone who's ordained to the high priesthood, we'd say they became ordained to the Melchizedek priesthood. However, in Joseph Smith's day, when you say someone was ordained to the high priesthood, that means they're ordained to the office of high priest. However, in the Book of Mormon, the term high priest, as you read it, refers to the leader of a congregation. Alma's the high priest. Ammon was the high priest over the people of Ammon, which we'll get to soon. But, okay, so which does it refer to? Well, it refers to all of those, because what Alma is describing in this chapter is the same pattern that he described in Alma, in what we call Alma chapter 12, that you move from line upon line. You have a soft heart, you're diligent, you'll know all things. You have a hard heart, you're slothful, and you lose everything. Another way to say this is like, okay, we know how high priests were ordained, but we have no idea how stake patriarchs or the teachers, quorum president were ordained. Now, it's all the same process. Now, the manner of and this process teaches us about Jesus Christ. As we'll talk about this in section 93, Jesus Christ progressed line upon line, precept upon precept. The manner of ordination, exceeding faith and good works. Well, that's how Christ progressed. High priests were ordained according to the foreknowledge of God. Yes, God's omniscient, and so he knows all things. I know people have talked about this, but we've never had Jesus Christ appearance or a Heavenly Father or anyone say, I'm progressing in knowledge. They did in their mortal experience, but when they became exalted, that stopped happening. This is the same pattern that progress that applies to everyone and to Jesus Christ. And this is something that leads through this whole process, and God ordains people as a way to show them how Jesus Christ was ordained. So it's interactive. Us, Christ, how I was ordained as a high priest, or how I became a high priest, is the same way that Jesus Christ became a high priest. And we discussed that in the book of Hebrews and with the more Joseph Smith translation. We're just not going to escape that today. And the point of all this is to get people to enter into the rest of the Lord. So what does that term mean? Well, in Mormon chapter 7, it just means heaven. However, President Joseph F. Smith, who was a nephew of Joseph Smith, who did the Joseph Smith translation, in the Joseph F. Smith manual, in chapter 48, it talks about the term "rest of the Lord," and he says, well, what the rest of the Lord means, it means just getting settled in your testimony. That you can see things like the CES letter, or see some video pop up on YouTube, and my goodness, I saw one video on YouTube. I must leave the church because of one video. I'm not using my critical one video, and that, yeah, it's just, you see stuff and it doesn't bother you. Lastly, this chapter talks about Melchizedek as a real-life case study. And like Enoch, Melchizedek established a city of righteousness in Jerusalem, or Salem as it was at the time, which means peace. Salem, shalom. You read about this in the Joseph Smith translation, chapter 14, talks about what Melchizedek did. And he was very diligent. Like with Enoch, he was able to raise up a city of righteousness that was translated. And that's the pattern. What Enoch did, what Melchizedek did, why we hold the Melchizedek priesthood is to follow Melchizedek's and Enoch's pattern, and our rewards at stake to get these units translated, or if not, get them as close as possible. And that's where Alma's discourse ends. We shift gears, and here we are at the pit of pain, the pit of despair, the pit of doom, the death pit. This is Alma 14. So when Alma and Amulek get done preaching, you get the crowd reaction. The citizens and the city fathers of Ammonihah, they arrest Alma and Amulek. Well, so this is going on, several other things happen. First of all, Zeezrom speaks up and says, hey, wait a minute, I was wrong. You can call me a flip-flopper, but I've got new information, so I'm reassessing things. These are right. I was wrong. I was doing the wrong thing. So Zeezrom and the other people that believed Alma and Amulek, they get run out of town. Apparently, this is just male members. The wives and children stay put in Ammonihah. They probably weren't at this gathering. What was going on, we're not exactly sure. So what happens is the city fathers then build a large pit, set it on fire. It's kind of like with the Benedict again, and they throw the woman and the children in the pit. They also burn the records and the scriptures. So this gives us a bit of clues. They had writing on combustible material, and in Mesoamerica, how the books were like, they're sort of an accordion. They're sort of zigzag, and so let me pull it up like this. I should have thought about this beforehand. The books were kind of like accordion style like this, so you'd read a page and you'd flip it, be like that, and you turn it over that, and you read it another way. And so I think it was one of the church videos, they had that in there. I can't remember which one now. I'm drawing a blank on it, but you see there's a accordion style, and that's how they'd have books. They wouldn't use scrolls. These are thrown in the fire, and this raises the question, and Alma and Amulek have to watch this. So this raises the question of the problem of pain, or the technical word theodicy. You can see that word there by Leibniz, the mathematician who, along with Newton, created calculus. It's interesting, mathematicians tend to be really faithful people. Pascal, Isaac Newton, Leibniz, Descartes, famous mathematicians, but also people who believed in God. That's an interesting correlation. So as this is going on, Amulek turns to Alma and says, well, let's use our priesthood to stop this. Melchizedek was able to shut the mouths of lions like Daniel. We can set defiance armies, raise the dead. And Alma responds, well, I thought of that, but the Holy Ghost prompted me not to do this. And he said, God lets this stuff happen so that righteous judgments come upon wicked people. And this is the same thing said in Alma 60, verse 13. So think about that. Do you like that answer? How does that answer settle with you, that God lets people suffer? And we'll get to that in when I discuss the the Christ quotient at the end. So think about that answer and contrast it with how C.S. Lewis answers that question, and Leibniz with his theodicy. What the word theodicy is a Greek word that means theo means God, and dise means justice, dike. So Nike, Nike means victory, and dike, dike means justice. Nike like the shoes. So what happens in this city full of lawyers? Alma and Amulek get in prison. They get tortured. And remember, these are lawyers and judges. They're members of the Order of Nehor, like Amlici. That's important. And they engage in human rights violation, these lawyers do. They're in prison, they're stripped, they're starved, religious harassment, they're tortured. It says they gnash their teeth on them, they bit them. Imagine biting someone. And it's interesting, this chapter, this goes on for some time, and this chapter is very precise about naming dates. Those don't mean anything to us, but they do mean something, and it gives us a clue that Mormon was working through an annals or some sort of registry where he's able to track the dates and the time when these events happened. What happens is they hit a point, and Alma prays, and God intervenes, and the prison collapses. They brought the house down. And this is interesting because the same prison appears in Helaman chapter 5, so apparently they built it up. But the prison collapses, and everyone starts running like goats running from two lions. And that's, okay, how does that settle with you for an answer to pain? When you have someone who's an atheist, I'm reading a book by Gary Cox called The God Confusion, and it's discussing the problems of God and arguments against God. And one of the questions that's always brought up is the problem of pain. In fact, Thomas Aquinas said there's only two arguments against God. The first argument is that God's unnecessary. You can explain everything in terms of natural laws. The second one is God's incompatible. If you have a God, it's incompatible with evil, and we obviously know that evil goes on, so it's either God or evil, and you pick one of those. How does this answer from the Book of Mormon answer those questions? You find it settling or unsettling? So let's chew on that for a bit before I give you my answer out of the microwave oven, like a microwave burrito. Now, let's sit there and think about it on your own, and is there a better answer? So Alma, chapter 15, this is where the loose ends get tied up. They go to the city where the Zeezrom, the male refugees, went. Zeezrom's got something with his head, and he's just having a lot of psychosomatic problem where he's ill, and he's having a lot of guilt issues. You know, he saw these people chased out, and you see him getting burned, understanding that, yeah, that was part of his problem, is that he caused that with what he was doing. And they come there, he gets healed, they baptize the widowers. This is kind of interesting, so we have all these men with no wives. What happens to them? Do they remarry? We don't know. It's interesting. And they all go back to Zarahemla. And this chapter concludes mentioning Amulek's sacrifices because his family turned on him. His own father turned on him. This was a wealthy man. He was high in society, an influence in his community. He had a lot of people under his protection, under his shield, kind of like a sheikh or a mafia don, if you can do a good version of that. But he sacrificed that, and it gets acknowledged in this chapter. So Alma 16, and this is sort of the punchline to this story. What happens is that Alma and Amulek prophesied that the city is going to be destroyed. And what happens is the Lamanites invade the city. So this gives us a clue to the location. This is probably close on the Lamanite border. It certainly was away from Zarahemla. And the Lamanites come in, and it was a very quick massacre. And it's interesting is that the Nephites get word of it. So the general Zoram, and that's interesting because the Zoramites were always kind of separate from the rest of the Nephites. Nephi and Sam and Jacob and Joseph stick together, but for some reason, Zoram's descendants were always a little bit separate, and they're very good generals. That's an interesting character trait. But Zoram, he consults with the prophet, and the prophet says, okay, this is where the army's going to be. We need to start doing that. We need to have our generals consult with the prophets more often. So they're able to not stop the army, but they're able to get the captives back. The Lamanites captured some of the Nephites. They dug a shallow grave and buried the bodies. One of the problems, and if you remember the Hutus and the Tutsis in Africa, when you have a lot of bodies like that, you just can't give them a decent burial. If they do that, it's like the battlefield of Verdun during World War I. They have an ossuary there. Several thousand of the soldiers died. They found that they can ID some of them, so they have proper graves for them. Others they can't, so they just pile the bones in the bottom of this chapel and said, look, this is a monument to our stupidity and our evil. So look at these bones and think about it. And it's the same thing with that. And they named the city, no longer called Ammonite, it's called the Desolation of Nehors, because of the scent of the decaying body. It's like there's this underground coal fire in this city called Centralia. I think it's in New York or on the East Coast. There's this coal fire that went on there, and it's underground. They had to evacuate the city, and it's sort of the same thing here. That's persuasion. You belong to that church that smells, don't you? The Order of Nehors. Yeah, the city that smells is named after you. That's a bit of a black humor, just because serious death, but it's interesting persuasion. And this chapter continues, and the work of salvation goes on. So a lot of the loose ends are tied up on this one, and we've run out of the chapters. So let's hit the Christ quotient. So what these prophecies get fulfilled. Warnings like in the family proclamation are real, they get fulfilled. That's one thing to learn. Christ is serious about this. And if you have a image of Jesus Christ, he's just a large teddy bear giving you a hug. That's not an accurate description. He's a lamb, but he's also the Lion of the tribe of Judah. So how do you develop things? How did Christ develop? And is that a pattern for us? Well, yeah, Christ is our example. So everyone began the same standing as with Jesus Christ, and we chose certain ways, and we have to accept the consequences of our choice. There's foreordination and foreknowledge. Are you soft, diligent, and you go from grace to grace? Are you hard, slothful, and you go from wickedness to wickedness? Do you have enough sense to put the brakes on with what you're doing? Or are you keep these ordinances like David A. Bednar talked about? A lot of this chapter is about tying up loose ends. Do you follow up in your meetings, or just like hand out assignments and next week's more assignments without doing follow-up, not evaluating things like, was Elder Joseph B. Worthland, every time I did an assignment, he'd debrief himself, say, okay, how did I do and how can I do this better? So let's get back to the theodicy, the problem of pain. We have this argument that's been attached to Epicurus, the Greek. If God is good, God's omnipotent, and evil exists, you get to choose two of those. Is God unwilling, or is God unable to take pain away? Well, there's a fourth premise, and that's Jesus Christ. Good. He's powerful. Evil exists. Christ also exists. Christ is as real as the evil you're experiencing. How during the atoning process, he absorbed the pain. That we understand what sometimes is called God's permissive will. That's a term that the philosophers use, that God lets things happen, lets us exercise our agency. This life's probation, but it's not the sum totality of things. And let me talk about this. I'm at 23 minutes, but I just went through something interesting at work, is that I work at a hospital. So that's sort of important, because you have to, with hospitals, have a higher standard of conduct. And there's an issue with another unit. They wanted me to do something that was against corporate policy, and it would have involved billing fraud amounting to $1,300 per year. So I said no. They kept pushing. I told them no again, so twice. They talked to my direct report twice. My direct report told them no twice. They called my department manager. She told them no. So they're told 5 times. So finally, about 2 weeks ago, they got really mad at me and raising their voices. It got heated. So I had to file an online compliance report, and I got a call back. They looked into it. Action was I don't know. It was confidential. There's some action taken. And last Friday, I went to the unit, and there were different people in that unit. The people who were raising their voices and threatening me and threatening to report me, they were gone. I don't know what happened. When you're in a situation like that, be grateful that you can turn to Christ, that the priesthood principles that Jesus Christ revealed through Joseph Smith in section 121 were in place, and I've been trying to follow those. I'm not making myself out to be a hero, but be grateful that you have the example of Christ in these tricky situations. This problem of pain, it's a real thing. The kind of stress I've been going through dealing with that. Are you embracing premortality? Elder Maxwell called premortality a glorious reality. Sometimes we shy away from it because of the issue with blacks in the priesthood, and so they throw the baby out with the bathwater, but it's a real doctrine. What was Christ doing in the premortal existence? He is the lamb slain before the foundation of the world, the propitiator. What were we doing? Well, if we were on the ball, we were following Jesus Christ. If we were off the ball, we were following Lucifer, or we were following Christ in a half-hearted measure. Fortunately, in mortality, we can improve our discipleship. We can follow Christ better. And following Christ, that's the point.